do some talking at you, but we have some places in the meeting where we're expecting you all to weigh in. We're counting on your advice, which you'll see in a second here. The introductions, I think, have already been made. Tammy, we still can't see your screen here.
Can you see it now?
No, we can't.
I see it.
Yeah, I can see it as well.
Great.
You might have a second screen floating around, Clark. And just so you know, while I'm here, I am recording this thing. So the meeting, just to share with others that aren't able to make it, or if we have a piece that is helpful to share with our partners.
Okay, well, if you all can see the screen, I fortunately have a paper copy, so I can work with what I got here. If you can see the agenda there, I mentioned where it's kind of broken into a couple of parts here where we'll talk, but we'll also be looking for some feedback, because there are a few of you who haven't been part of the process in the past. We're going to take a moment to recap what it is that we've covered at past meetings, but do that pretty briefly. We're going to be talking about the organization that would carry this forward at some length, and how that might be structured and where it might be housed. We're going to talk about the idea of having a safe travel summit in the fall in conjunction with a community-wide survey as well. And be looking for your feedback on that. And finally, Vanessa has an update, and I think wants some feedback on the automated enforcement. In the transportation safety action plans, they include both structural items and also non-structural items like public education that we'll be talking about. But in Vanessa's case, Vanessa's talking about some of the structural items. So we'll make sure that we save time for her at the end of the meeting to talk about that. With that, I want to, Tammy, if you go onto the project management team slide there. Again, you all are on the management team or have been asked to attend by a member of the management team in your place. Tyler and Hovey have already introduced themselves as the sponsors here for the project, along with Oregon Department of Transportation. Consultant team members have already been introduced, and we're basically two categories of folks here. That is the technical transportation engineers who worked on the TSAPs for both of the jurisdictions, both Deschutes County and Bend, and also Tammy and myself, who are in the public education and communications field. Goals for the project, wanted to step up and look from the 10,000 foot level at what it is that we're trying to do here with this project. And the first thing is we're looking to raise public consciousness countywide about transportation safety. You know, folks, we have a problem. We'll be talking about that in a minute, what the nature of the problem is. We want to be able to mobilize community resources to address that problem, to build a foundation for an enduring program, a program that can keep this program, sustain this program over time, and to get some results. The messaging campaign here is focused on 4 things, and all of these are research-based. And Ashley's going to talk in a second about what the research shows, but what the research shows is the main problems for us in Deschutes County and Bend are sober driving, safe driving speeds, reducing distracted driving, and safe summer and winter driving, which I'm not exactly sure why winter driving could possibly be an issue in Central Oregon, but it turns out it is. So with that, I think, Ashley, if you could talk about the highlights from what we saw, again, for the people who weren't part of the process earlier, talk about the highlights from the data, crash data for Deschutes County and for Bend.
Sure. So those 4 topics and emphasis areas that Clark just mentioned are based on the transportation safety action plans that we developed a couple years ago. Deschutes County and the city of Bend each have their own plan. that are that include a lot of coordination, but identify issues unique to each different location and the different contexts of a city versus a rural area. So what we did at the beginning of kicking off this effort with Clark and Tammy was just revisit that crash data. There was some newly released data that was available that was not available when we did the analysis for the TSAP. So we wanted to make sure that these key issues were still the most relevant issues to be focusing on, and the outcome was they were. None of the kind of takeaways really changed, but we look at a 5-year set of reported crash data to try to capture fluctuations that may come in year to year, with crashes being somewhat random, and you can use that to identify the key issues. We focused on the fatal and severe crashes, acknowledging that the patterns among all crashes might be a bit different, but we really want to address those crashes that are resulting in a fatality or a life-changing injury. So for Deschutes County, the first slide here, you can see of the fatal and severe crashes, when we look at the newest data that was available, there is a lag and when crash data is complete from ODOT, so that's why it goes through 2019. But we see here over 40% of the fatal and severe crashes involve speed, so that continues to be an area of high focus. Almost a quarter of them involve impaired driving, so that's drugs or alcohol were reported with a crash. And then, as Clark said, winter driving is one that, particularly in the county, and this was one that we did see a bigger emphasis on with some of the newer data, but 15% of fatal and severe crashes have occurred on snow and ice. And then the last category of kind of vulnerable users, this is one that I think is somewhat captured in that summer messaging, but not just limited to that, but making sure that we focus on pedestrians, bicyclists, and motorcyclists. And although the pure numbers of crashes may be lower, when these crashes happen, they often result in a severe injury or fatality because of the vulnerability of those users. So if you want to go to the next slide. So for the city of Bend, just looking at it, there are just a little bit different patterns of the data, just given the rural versus urban nature. So here we have 11% involving excessive speed, and this is based on just the crash report. So if the police reported speed involved, a little under 20% involving alcohol or drugs, a bit lower involving snow and ice. And this is, I think, just because in the city, typically when there's snow and ice, speeds are just a bit slower. So that's why I think that's a bit lower than you might see in the county. And then here we have the pedestrian and bicyclist crashes are a bit higher, and that's just, I think, due to the volume of pedestrians and bicyclists in urban areas. So, so you can see with this that there's some consistency in the messaging here, but there are a few different patterns given the rural versus urban areas. So Clark, I think, are you
Okay? I'm
just
sorry.
back over or
Let's moving on. The bottom line from this, Ashley, I appreciate you going back through that again. The bottom line for this, and we have had a chance also to look at not just the 5-year pattern ending in 2019, but also looking at the 2020 data. And when you look at that, the bottom line is that traffic was down considerably. The pattern in Central Oregon was the traffic was down considerably. Traffic counts were down, but traffic deaths were up markedly to the highest level that they had been in more than 5 years. And when you look at the pattern, it's exactly the pattern that Ashley talked about. It's just 3 things that would be needed to cut traffic deaths by 2/3. And that includes speed, slowing down, alcohol and drugs, and buckling up seatbelts. And it's remarkable when you look at the seatbelt stuff because their compliance with seatbelts is very high. But when you look at crash data, a lot of the people who are dying or seriously injured in crashes aren't wearing seatbelts. So among the few people who aren't wearing seatbelts happen to include people who are affected by crashes. So the whole idea behind public education for this is to focus. So the focus is on those areas, and then I mentioned distracted driving, and we'll bring that as well. We earlier on in the process, we looked at peer communities and what some other counties around the US and in Oregon are doing. And in Oregon, we looked in particular at two programs. One was for Lane County called the Safety Lane or the Safe Lane Coalition, and then for Clackamas County with a branded program called Drive to Zero. Both of those counties have had programs in place. We had at the last meeting invited in Clackamas County to tell us about the evolution of their program. And Clackamas County's successful program has evolved probably over something like 25 years. And they have a multifaceted program now that has dedicated funding and full-time staff associated with it, both programmatic staff and also public education staff that they can deploy for their different programs. From the lessons learned, if you will, from those communities, Clackamas County, Lane County, and from other counties that have done this successfully, communities that have done it successfully, we identified success factors for these countywide programs. And where we want to move with this program is in the same direction with these other successful programs. First, we know that you need to have a local champion. We need to have a committed group that driving the effort. And in the Clackamas County example, you'll recall, the guy who's been driving the program for a long time is personally committed to this. It's has a personal story behind his interest in traffic safety or transportation safety, which goes back to his childhood. And he has been able to form a committed group as well to keep the program driving forward. We also need broad community support because reaching the entire community is best done through community organizations who are already in touch. And we'll see in a moment when we start looking at some of these groups that they have capacity to help us in spreading the word. Programs need to be able to continue, need dedicated funding and staff to sustain the effort. And finally, you need to get some results. You need to get results early so that people are interested enough to stay involved and that you can attract more people to get involved with those success stories. The leadership group that we have in mind is what we're calling for right now, the Central Oregon Safe Travel Team. And we have identified who we think might be the core members for this team, the folks in Deschutes County who would be most interested, be most involved. And that includes several different county departments and components of county government. Includes the same thing in Bend, the leadership in Bend, but also people at the department level, programmatic level. The same for the small cities, and then of course the MPO. And just speculation about who a few others might be in that leadership group. And then in addition to the leadership group, I mentioned the idea of having partners in the community. And our view of partners in the community, the role is, these aren't people that go to meetings, but they are people, organizations who you would involve for a particular project. So for example, if you had a project that was on related to drunk driving, trying to do something related to drunk driving, then you might involve Mothers Against Drunk Driving. You might involve some different organizations from the medical community, might involve the private transportation rideshare companies to help spread the word. And also these organizations to some extent are geographic. So if you had a project that you wanted to focus in the Redmond area, then you'd be involving some Redmond organizations specific to that project. So, and again, the value of these organizations isn't just to get behind the program, but these are organizations who have the ability to communicate. Almost all of them have contemporary communications capability and lists, and so they can reach their people they're affiliated with and other organizations they're affiliated with more easily than we can from a central location. So again, the concept for the program is some type of central leadership group, and then or on a project-specific basis, organizations that become partners to help implement different aspects of public education campaigns. One of the things that we did was look around to try to find out if there was an existing organization that was already in the same space that we might be able to convince to add transportation safety to the list of things that they're looking at. So we have some of the right people in the room, they're already meeting. Could we add this rather than trying to create a whole new organization? And one of the organizations that's been identified there is Central Oregon Area Commission on Transportation, COACT as it's known. And this is one of similar organizations that are around the state. And I think it's been meeting for 25 years or something. And Tyler, I wondered if you might talk a little bit more about COACT and the potential for COACT and in that leadership position.
Thanks, Clark. Clark mentioned COACT, the area commissions on transportation. There's area commissions all over the state. They're chartered by the Oregon Transportation Commission, and their role has varied over time. They're in the process right now of the area commissions are working with the OTC to kind of recharter themselves, and they're developing new missions essentially because of just changes in the way the types of programs and things that they're seeing. And so we were thinking that because COACT has been in existence for a long time, they meet regularly, it covers the 3-county area plus the Warm Spring tribal lands, that they might be the right place to at least start, and have this group housed within that. And I think we were thinking as well that even though our current work is focused on Deschutes County and the urban areas within Deschutes County, the issues that we're seeing here are probably very similar to what's taking place in Crook County and Jefferson counties. And over time, I think we would have a goal to expand this type of safety planning and safety outreach, into the greater Central Oregon area. And COACT would seem to us to be the logical place to do that.
So with that, I think Matt has a question for you. We're interested in your feedback on this idea. And again, part of the idea of thinking Central Oregon instead of just Bend and Deschutes County came from you. At the very first meeting, we asked about that, and your group emphasized the Central Oregon identity as being the way that we should think about that. So with Matt.
Sure. So Tyler framed it up really well. So we want this section to be just some input and feedback on, do you think COACT is the right place? And if not, or maybe in addition to COACT, is there another way that you think we might best engage the agencies and partners that are interested in this? So what are your thoughts? Chime in. I can hear everyone well, but I'm having Teams issues, so I see everyone looks like randomly slow-moving robots. So I don't see you raise your hand. So just feel free to chime in if you have some thoughts on this.
Or we'll call on you.
Yeah, we could call on you. So what do you think, Janet? What do you think, Cody?
I can tell you, I was just Googling them because what went through my head, I know nothing about the group, right? Other than the little bit that you've said is like, what do they do? How active are they? Is that a good spot? We also have that transportation data warehouse, but that's more for data. And then this is more of a program. So possible, sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, and as I mentioned, I think COACT, their mission for a long time was they helped allocate ODOT's funding within the Tri-County area through the 4-year STIP funding cycle. As the funding that goes out through that process now has diminished significantly over the last, particularly over the last 5 or 6 years, and so the area commissions, that role of kind of directly engaging the OTC in funding discussions has been diminished. And I think a lot of the area commissions right now are in the process of trying to figure out, okay, what is our role? What's the next step? How do we stay relevant and engaged. And so I think the safety discussion is at least something that we should broach with them going forward.
Yeah, and just maybe some context from my own perspective. I've talked to agencies around Central Oregon, no one on this call in particular on it, what I'm going to share, but what you were saying, Tyler, was resonating recently in a conversation I was having, that COACT, it was STIP focused. It's not really as compelling as it was before for the reasons you were describing. So perhaps with this rechartering, there is a time to say, we have decision makers who show up, there's city council members, there's county commissioners that show up, there's staff level that shows up. So it could be a really good spot to get people's attention, and then also share information broadly amongst people that would attend. So is that a worthwhile avenue? And again, if not, we do want to have that broad regional connection. So is there a new committee? We're always reluctant to say we need new committees for everything. So this is, I think, a nice opportunity to engage with a group that's already meeting.
Yeah, I'd just echo what Tyler and Matt have already said. I think COACT's kind of looking for a purpose, and I think this is a great purpose for them. I guess the question would be, I don't think that this has been brought to them formally yet. So would that be something that you would do, Tyler?
Yeah, I'm gonna be reaching out to the COACT staff to discuss this and see if this is something that they even want to consider. And if they don't, then we would come back, I think, to the PMT here and be looking for other options or opportunities on how to move forward with this.
One of the intriguing opportunities there is it includes elected officials, and that potential where you've got policymakers there. If you're really trying to drive some initiatives forward, having direct involvement of the elected leadership seems like a big plus.
Yeah, and so I guess on that note too, for our part, with the Deschutes County Road Department, I mean, we'll be talking to our county commissioner members on COACT about this in advance and making sure we get their support for this up front. And I'd encourage others who work for elected officials that are part of COACT to do the same thing.
No one's mentioned one of the aspects of this that's interesting is the involvement of 2 more counties and the communities in those counties. I'm interested if anybody has any feedback. Tyler mentioned that the transportation safety problems that they experience are pretty similar to the ones that we experience in Deschutes County, so that there might be some synergy there. But any positive or negative feelings about that involvement of 2 more counties?
I would offer positive feelings for that. I don't know that there's really been any outreach yet to staff at those counties yet.
Yeah, I don't think there has been. just an idea at this stage.
Yeah, we haven't made any contact with Crook or Jefferson counties, but I do know that Vanessa might confirm this too. Prineville has some NHTSA funding, that's National Highway Transportation Advisory Committee, I think, funding for drunk driving this summer. So they're doing some initiatives on their own, but these kind of things we could pair up together. So I know the smaller communities, Madras and Prineville, definitely have an emphasis on safety with ODOT projects. So I think we can safely say that they are committed to safety projects, and that I think that they would embrace having some communications and things that they could share.
I know that I did speak with the city of Madras about some of their concerns regarding pedestrian safety and speeding through town. So I know it is on their radar and that they're very interested in addressing it. And then in looking at some of the high visibility enforcement awards that the counties have applied for. It looks like Crook County has about $6,000 in HVE award funding for Dewey, speed, and seatbelts, and distracted. And then I might as well just bring it up now. The city of Bend just got $10,000 for high visibility Dewey and distracted driving for their police department. So I know that while Jefferson isn't actively pursuing HVE funding, it is something that we've had a discussion with some of the city officials there.
Well, it sounds like we have general support for moving in that direction. So I guess we leave with the charge that it's in Tyler's court. We can certainly help to think about how to present that, or what we want the angle to be. There's certainly a lot of nuances to what that looks like, but a good step forward for a regional forum on safety.
Thank you all for the input. Why don't we move on and talk a little bit about the idea of a safe travel summit? One of the concepts that we have for grabbing public attention is having the first ever Central Oregon Safe Travel Summit, doing it this fall. This would be to maximize attendance, participation. This would be a virtual event where it's interesting to just hear the stories about things with projects in individual communities, because this would be an opportunity to pull those together and hear about some of the things that are happening successfully. We also want to engage not just people working on the projects, but also more people from the public. So people from neighborhood associations, from the smaller communities around Deschutes County, and potentially these other counties, to engage them in trying to come up with solutions. When we talk about these problems and solutions, try to address that question of what is it we can do to reverse the trend that we have now in increases in deaths from crashes. What is it that we can do? We know what the solutions are, but how do we implement the solution? So if we know the problems are speed and impaired driving, lack of seat belts and distracted driving, what is it that we as a community can do? How do we create the right culture to address those? And that would be the idea behind pulling people together for a summit. It's interesting, during 2020 with COVID, we found that with public meetings that we could dramatically increase participation by switching to a virtual format. And we're planning to take advantage of that for the summit. The summit would be held sometime in late September. We don't have a date set, but we would like to set a date soon so we can begin enlisting people to participate, recruiting folks to be part of that. We intend to make sure that we do enough publicity that everyone in the community becomes aware that this is happening. So the idea of a seminal event that attracts broad participation, that hopefully puts a capstone on the current phase of the public education process. With that, we've got a few questions to get your feedback on related to this concept of a summit. That first priority, who is it that we should get to participate, and how should they be invited? Who do we most want there? Who's on our don't miss list to participate in this first ever summit? And how is it that we should extend the invitation to them so we make sure that they do it? Let me ask the Bend. I know the Bend Public Information people and the Whitney from the county are here, so I'm interested in those of you who do communications for a living here. who would you be thinking of reaching out to for this event, and what's the best way to make sure that they accept the invitation?
Yeah, so I think for the neighborhood associations, it would be a good opportunity to just extend the invite to them, so that they can get it out to their members as well. I usually send out a weekly newsletter, to those groups, and so I can always include information in that, and then with what they do with that is kind of up to them, but I think that that would be a great group to start with.
Thank you. Other thoughts, suggestions?
You know, I'm thinking of some of the groups that we had involved, our transportation system plan groups, and, you know, individuals who are even on the CTAC, our Community Transportation Advisory Committee. So probably those individuals. Of course, there are community groups who are sort of involved in that process with some levels of advocacy. It seems like some of those groups would be good invitees as well. Assuming sort of a partnership approach to this work, you know, that for us, typically media release sort of thing targeted to some of those individuals and groups would probably be relatively effective. There's probably an opportunity to sort of do a more individualized touch. We're in the process of hiring a new like sort of civic engagement staff person, and that individual won't be in the city probably until like September. But these are the kinds of things I'd love to have that individual work on, in part to get to know the community better and start establishing those relationships. So there could be an opportunity there sort of coming up in the near future. And of course, our electeds and their involvement and staff as well. So getting some PD folks and transportation mobility folks engaged as well.
You mentioned electeds. What does it take, you think, to make sure that we get participation of the elected leadership? Again, thinking of Deschutes County, the communities in Deschutes County, Bend, and the others. What's best way to make sure we get at least some elected officials there?
So from the city perspective, you know, Eric does a weekly memo that goes to councilors. So an invitation there, a reminder, his council reports at a council meeting. I mean, we have some councilors who are pretty well engaged in transportation and transportation safety. So I feel like getting representation from Bend City Council won't be too difficult. I guess it's a question of how many of them would want to be involved and engaged, but it does seem like it's an area of interest and a priority for a number of our councilors.
I can jump in on the county perspective there too. I mean, obviously, we can handle invitations for our own county electeds, but as far as other cities within the counties, we work closely with communications counterparts in the cities of Redmond, and then have contacts within the city of Sisters on the Pine, as well as, you know, Sun River and those outlying areas. So we certainly could share the invitation with our list of contacts to make sure that we're reaching the county broadly as a whole.
Thank you. What about the groups? I'm interested, the suggestion, the groups, for example, the community groups that were involved in developing the TSAPs or in transportation system plans, community by community. Are those groups best reached through transportation planning staff in those communities? What's the best way to identify those and reach them?
I think from the city, I mean, we have a pretty good list since we just came out of the TSP work of some of those individuals, just email lists and contact lists that came out of the TSP interest. So I think it'd be relatively easy for us to do an email invitation to some of those folks and indicating their interest in transportation issues, sort of flag them for receiving an invitation and then get it out to them through those means.
Other ideas there on membership attendance at the this first ever summit?
You know, it might be good to just mention that we will be meeting like work sessions, not dates to be determined, for city council workshop and also a county commissioner workshop. So between those two, by the time we meet, we'll have a date, and that would be another way where we'll be communicating through a public meeting. But maybe having a champion at each one of those work sessions would be helpful to connect a broader group. I think Janet's got her hand up too. Go ahead, Janet.
Yeah, I was just thinking, you know, as we're talking about the TSAP or the TSP participants, and we're kind of like mining over the same groups that, you know, the same couple people that participated in all this. And to me, for this to work, we need like what are they called? Student council in the schools, bar and restaurant, tour companies, property managers, you know, like the groups that are doing the things that we want them to stop, which is everybody, but you know, there's definitely some select groups there. So I don't know how we can get that involvement, because that can shape how we do programs from the user end.
That, I think we'd be interested in exploring that idea with you a little bit further to see. I think the idea of not the usual participants is probably important here too. When we looked at that group of potential partner organizations, it's really diverse, and it's not very difficult to identify a direct connection to transportation safety for many of them. So I think by looking through that list and brainstorming with you, so if we could get back to you on that and ask for some more ideas on that, more details on that, it would be helpful to us. Any other thoughts?
Yeah, it looks like Vanessa.
Yeah.
And then Joshua.
That's hilarious. Janet actually just said all the things, like every group I was just thinking, outreaches to schools, the COCC, the extension campuses, leadership groups for youth. There's several in town that are associated with, you know, some of their college goals or some of their areas of interest. I was also thinking events, event planning. So some of the reasons people show up in town, whether they be concerts or festivals, those people I've worked with a little bit on the Shared Future Coalition surrounding safe substance prevention, you know, prevention of abuse, substance abuse. Mm-hmm. I think all those things would be great. One of the things that we tried to do in partnership in regard to safety on Century Drive was partnering with Mount Bachelor and, you know, some of the shuttles that go up there, and yeah, so kind of exactly in line with what Janet was saying.
Yeah, the younger drivers here too. You mentioned several of the groups there are affiliated with younger drivers, but younger drivers, the data show younger drivers are at greater risk here for the particular causes of crashes that we're talking about. They tend to be more often younger drivers. Joshua, did you have something too?
Yeah, so when Jenna was talking, another group too, and having not grown up in Oregon and getting licensed here, the thing that came to mind is, at least in New Mexico, we had sort of private driving schools or like driver's education businesses. So if we're thinking of younger drivers, that kind of came to mind. Piggybacking to off of some earlier comments and sort of where some of this behavior is happening that then translates to folks getting in the car. I'm thinking of like Central Oregon Visitors Association, Visit Bend's, our tourism promotion agencies. And Visit Bend's done a really great job, in particular, most recently with sort of just being responsible tourists and visitors in the community. So I do feel like this is something they would be interested in. So those tourism promotion agencies kind of come to mind for me as well. And then speaking of venues, so like Old Mill or even Downtown Bend Business Association, in part because they have the space to put up banners in their areas. And so those visual cues and reminders for folks about safe behaviors, I think are helpful, particularly in the downtown core and the Old Mill, where again, it's folks driving in and out through our community.
Yeah, the driving school thing was mentioned earlier by Ann too. It's interesting opportunity there where younger drivers are, and it could be that it's because she has a daughter just at the right age to be in driving school that it came to mind, but it sounded like an interesting possibility. And they're both the ones associated with public schools, but also a private driver school. So any other thoughts on that topic before we move on to the next question for you?
I just have a couple more. The hospitals, health departments, and then also enforcement isn't here, but the district attorney's office is really supportive of these safety measures. So having some of those groups together or part of that event is helpful too.
Yeah, no, those are ones that.
Yeah, I think they're on the list.
Or list, yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know if this is a group that exists still, but the Mothers Against Drunk Driving, at least in Washington, they used to do like summits in the high schools themselves, and they would have people dress up and walk around the school as like a Grim Reaper almost, and it was like throughout the day. So it was to represent like the number of deaths that happen within a given school day from drunk driving and distracted driving accidents. And so I'm curious if there's like programs like that around here in Central Oregon.
Yeah, we haven't been in touch with them. Tyler thinks they don't have a strong program in Central Oregon, but we really haven't checked that out.
They don't have a strong program, but there is a section, branch, I'm not sure what they call themselves, a group, and it's led by Kate Duke, I believe.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, there's another group, and I don't know how organized they are, but I think it's called One DUI Too Many, they're somewhat active. I think we could reach out to that group as well.
That just reminded me, I think also reaching out to like private transport, private like cabs and shuttles and all of those other groups. I know we have CET, but any of those smaller groups that help with transportation. And I would even say, I know this is kind of odd, but it's towing companies, they like to get involved civically, and they have to deal with a lot of these crashes. And so generally they're very on board with helping out with safety mission.
You know, these are all great ideas. I really appreciate it. And we will try to put our list back in front of you again, so that you have a chance to look at it between meetings and give us additional feedback. But really appreciate the input on this, some of it very specific. We're interested in the best date and time for this. We're thinking about a 2-hour block of time toward the end of September. And if you think about the week of September 27th, the last week in the month, are there particular days of the week or times that would seem most appropriate for this? Again, we're doing it virtually. We're talking about doing it virtually. So we're interested in that a 2-hour block at a time of day to be determined. So is there a most promising time of day? Is there a most promising day of the week? Or in the reverse, avoid days that we should avoid at all costs, given the range of people we're talking about here? Go ahead.
On the county end, I would say avoiding Wednesdays.
Avoiding, I'm sorry, what? Wednesdays?
Wednesdays.
Okay.
That's city council day too. So, another thought was I just Googled what events were in September, and it looks like Oktoberfest is September 18th through 25th. So it might be a neat idea to have the summit at a time that afterwards or in conjunction with, you could go do a booth or do something and start doing some marketing, get a banner of that slogan you just had. And then you might get a few more attendees too, if you had it's virtual, but.
Is Oktoberfest in the downtown? Is it in Drake Park? Where's the?
I think it's downtown. Looks like it says downtown.
Okay. And 18th through 25th of September?
Yeah.
Joshua, do you or somebody from the city know, is that one of the ones where kind of official city sanction, close the streets off of the downtown, et cetera? Or is this more of a nonprofit private event?
Yeah, it's Downtown Bend Business Association hosts that event. There are road closures and but they just get permits for closing the right of way.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate the thought on that. Great idea. Any other date, time? I said avoid Wednesdays, Anything about time of day that you think might be best? Again, think virtually here. So
Yeah.
no travel involved.
The neighborhood associations tend to do evening meetings because a lot of them work or have kids in school or, fill in the blank.
And Clark, we've tried doing like open houses, and they were kind of more in-person open houses on Saturdays to try to get more folks. I don't know that it worked because I think in Central Oregon, if the weather's nice, people want to be outside enjoying stuff. And so what we thought was a really creative idea to try to get more people. This was for the core area plan. I don't know that we got as many folks as we had hoped because it ended up being a nice day. And so people, we had a steady stream of folks, but not as many as we had hoped. So I tend to agree that probably weekday evenings would be the best option.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm wondering too if there's like any opportunity with the river floaters and some of the businesses that run like the shuttle companies in that area. I think that you can probably capture a lot of folks by going to them. Just make sure you're not at the end of the river after they've had all of their drinks and get in before.
What would you expect to come out of a summit like this? Again, first ever, trying to grab public attention, trying to get leaders involved from around the county in this. What should we be hoping to take away from this first event?
Well, I mean, for me, it's sharing the data and then also maybe creating some safety culture. So is it a pledge? Is it a place where you can go to create that, to grow more safety information throughout Central Oregon? Those are kind of the things top of mind for me, but I don't know what do you think, everyone?
That was one of the things that I have been toying with in my brain is the idea of, and I think I may have mentioned it in this group, but the idea of what it means to recreate or live like a Central Oregonian and incorporating that safety message. Like if you're gonna play like someone who lives here or you're gonna be here, that involves an element of safety, not just the whole be nice here and bend idea, but like piggybacking on that type of positive messaging.
Yeah, we heard from Clackamas County how important positive messaging is. And one of the reasons they haven't gotten very much involved in the NHTSA sponsored campaigns is because so many of them have a negative base. They feel that data show the positive approach works much better, much more effective in dealing with public education on transportation safety.
Yeah. So like an example of their positive campaigns are most people drive the speed limit. Most people don't drive impaired. Those kind of things are their positive spins. So if there's something that we could do to alleviate fatal and severe crashes, it would be speed and impairment. How could we make this summit relevant to that?
Yeah, come up with a plan, more of a plan of action that out of this. Other thoughts on the outcomes for this? Well, again, we appreciate all of the input here, and we will be sending you more stuff before the next time this group gets together, but very much appreciate the insights that you have. We also wanted to talk about a survey. I mentioned that we'll have group coming to the summit, and that might be dozens or it might be hundreds of people. But what we'd like to do is aim for thousands being involved in some kind of a survey that would be done in conjunction with that. And the survey would precede, we heard the idea of things that could be done ahead of the summit, but one of the things that we're definitely planning to do is a survey ahead of the summit. And that survey would be announced via billboards that we have. So it would be an interactive opportunity for everybody to participate. And we've had some success in the past with similar surveys, getting thousands, literally thousands of people weighing in on a topic like this. So Tammy's going to talk a little bit about spreading the word on the survey, and we'll have some more questions for you on that.
Yeah, we really want to get broad participation in the survey. So just looking out at how we can get it out through the channels. And Clark had mentioned the billboards, but also news media, our social media channels out there, and all these partner organizations. There's been a whole bunch of really great ideas about how we could, all the different partner organizations, and how we could really leverage those out to get broad reach for the surveys. And then potential sponsorships and giveaways and things like that. Really, we really want to touch everybody to get as most participation as possible, and have had really good success with that in the past. So we just kind of wanted to open it up to the rest of you and ask, how do you guys think really we'll be able to maximize the participation in the survey? And are there any ideas you have regarding the survey that we would be doing?
Yeah, we'll maybe ask the communications people again to go first. This is what you do for a living, so.
I mean, we'd want to identify sort of who sends like a media release for that. I'm assuming it would probably be coming from the city, given the MPO's leadership on this and our relationship there. And then I think it would be pretty standard for our typical survey releases, media release, social media. Michaela has her neighborhood folks in nextdoor.com. So I think it'd be, from my perspective, pretty standard in terms of how we share the survey. With those communications tools and channels we have, our monthly newsletter.
And for the county, I mean, we have our processes for this are pretty similar. We'd be happy to defer to the city taking the lead on this and resharing on social, probably complimentary posts on Nextdoor since we reach a broader audience. So we can kind of support and reshare as needed. But pretty much all of what Joshua mentioned is we will include it in our quarterly e-newsletter, get it on the website, all of the things that we're happy to help.
How have you guys done anything with like reaching out to youth, particularly for something like that? Do you have any ideas around that? You mentioned some of the schools and stuff, and I know that can be kind of challenging sometimes partnering with them, but are there any other opportunities you see with really targeting the youth specifically?
I mean, nothing comes to mind for me because I think historically that's been where we've been challenged with it. A lot of our work is reaching sort of more of a youth population, and I'm thinking like high school age students. So that would definitely take a little bit more thought and work to sort of figure out how to best get to students, recognizing some of the challenges that are there. For the TSP, we were going to try to work with parent-teacher organizations within the schools. That was an interesting experience because each school has its own individual organization and there's no centralized contact for those. You have to kind of go school by school, figure out who the PTO is and try to get contact info. So, it could be done, but it is sort of just the people, time and hours to sort of hold that list. And school district and McLean School said that they didn't have a central list, which was a little surprising to me, but also knowing how we work with our neighborhood associations when it's sort of independent organizations, it's a little hard to track them. So could be done, but would take some effort for sure.
Yeah, we anticipated with return to school in September that things might be pretty chaotic at the schools and the school districts will be distracted. And so there wasn't an easy way to make sure that we could get in that way. It's definitely not a business as usual situation for the schools for September 2021. So I think we could come up with some other strategies for reaching youth, and it can be advertising, can be social media, other things, but we might have to do things that don't rely on the schools to carry the message for us.
Is there a way to do geofencing of school areas or areas, that are geographic for targeting particular audiences, and then leveraging, awards or prizes or the things you had on the previous slide to get people to click and then take the survey. I wasn't sure if you guys had used any of that before.
Yeah, we do have a bunch of tricks, I'll call it, for getting people to respond to surveys, which include premiums of different kinds. And we thought even with this, because we got billboards, we might be able to attract a sponsor to offer up something big, you know, chance to win electric pickup truck, or, you know, something along those lines that would be eye-catching, attention-grabbing. But we have had pretty good luck, and some of them are, you know, very low-key premiums, but people respond to that. People like free stuff. People even like the offer of free stuff, if the chance to win free stuff. All of those things work.
This may, timing wise, dovetail into back to school materials being shared with parents and homes. So we may be able to get the school district to at least put a flyer or something into their communications, as you know, for each school district that we can contact that way, for Deschutes County and Ben Lapine.
I don't mean to backtrack. This isn't necessarily youth, but the neighborhood associations usually start their general membership meetings in September. And so there might be opportunity if you reached out to them individually, whether it's virtual or in person, to either talk for 5 minutes on their agenda or set up a table with your survey that people could take on their way out.
Great idea.
Yeah.
Any other thoughts on that? Again, the broader participation, the better, and we'll have more chances to ask you about this as well as we begin to develop materials for this. I'm sure that will stimulate some thinking about where these, you know, where we put this information, whose hands we put the information in, and how do we get it to them. Any other thoughts? That Tammy needs more ideas.
Yeah.
Do you need us to look for sponsors? Is that something this group should?
Well, I think we really have just started that idea, but if anyone has ideas about sponsors, we'd be interested.
Okay. So as you work through your communities, if you hear of any sponsors, transportation safety is a good one. So keep that in the back of your head as you're talking to everyone else today, this month.
Why don't we talk briefly about where the project goes from here? Put a calendar up in front of you. We talked earlier about the formation work that would have to go into finding a home for the safe travel team, and with some takeaways for Tyler about contacts to be made there to see if we have a potential with COAC or coming up with alternatives. Obviously, we need to begin the planning for the summit and publicizing the summit, which we were talking about. And we thought that we would have another meeting of this group sometime in August. We don't have a date yet, but Hovey has already begun shopping dates for you. So we're interested again. No, it's always a tough time of year, especially after a year when no one took any vacations, to be talking about having things during the summer months. But to make it work for the September launch, we'd like to get you back together again sometime in August. And then you mentioned launching the survey by September 1, maybe a little bit earlier, but having it ready to go, be launched in conjunction with the billboards at that point, which would hype the survey. And the Safe Travel Summit in the latter part of the month, date and time to be determined. And then we thought also we would like to have one debrief with the PMT after all of that happens, after the survey, after the summit, and we can evaluate what it is that we've learned through those processes. So that is the process that we have going forward. And with that, I think we are going to turn it over to Vanessa here to talk about automated enforcement.
Thank you. So recently I had been contacted by a couple of people, including our active transportation liaison, who was Chris Chang, who you guys have probably all worked with in the past, who was in my position previously, about some of the safety issues concerning those vulnerable road users like bicyclists and pedestrians. And he started really looking at, okay, what can we do to help encourage enforcement? And while it was awesome to see that Bend Police Department had, for the first time in a while, gotten some of these high visibility enforcement grants for Dewey and Distracted, there isn't any focus this year on speeding or red light running, which tends to be some of the driver behavior surrounding these pedestrian strikes, specifically in town. So he had asked me to kind of start the conversation about if the city or, well, specifically the city would be interested in pursuing any of these enforcement options on the parkway specifically, but anywhere in town. So I started doing some digging and I talked to Patrol Sergeant Guest, who was telling me that we were on the same page because he had just had a survey done by an independent company of several intersections all around Bend for red light running. And he gave me that report, and I'm not certain if I'm able to share it, but we can ask, and if so, I'll happily share it with the group about kind of some of the trends. And I know that that company that came out and did the survey, they are a leasing program. So they provide the equipment to the city for a monthly charge, and then they get a percentage of the citation funding that gets generated for it. One of the other issues that had come up was, well, do we have any opportunities for enforcing speed? As those of you that have been on the parkway know, there is not a lot of shoulder room for anyone to make any kind of traffic stops along the parkway. So it becomes a safety concern for not only the people trying to find a location to pull over to, yield to the officer, but then also the officer making the stop. So I think that's one of the reasons that you haven't seen a lot of enforcement on the parkway. And while you guys know that it is marked the speed at 45 miles per hour, people drive in excess of 65 miles an hour all the time without there being any kind of consequence in regard to a ticket. You can change the speeds on a road, but it doesn't necessarily, even if it's artificial, it doesn't change people's behavior as following the speeds. And sometimes that can lead to a higher risk, as you all probably know, of people going different speeds, some people following, some people speeding. And the larger that gap is, the more risk there is for crashes. So artificially lowering the speed limit hasn't proved to be effective. It's actually more dangerous. There's some driver feedback signs. You've probably seen the southbound one just before Powers Road. It tells you how fast you're going and reminds you, hey, you're supposed to be going 45. That one has been there for years and hasn't proven to be super impactful thus far at lowering speeds. So I started to do some research as to what are the rules and what are the opportunities for the city. Although House Bill 2530 was just signed by the governor, I found out this morning that the legislation that was approved was only half the bill. So the expansion of allowing fixed speed enforcement being done by a camera outside of the city of Portland, which is where it's the only place that it's currently allowed, was not passed. The only thing that they re-upped was the city of Portland's program. So under the legislation, we would have been eligible as a city for having a population over 50,000. That was not a part of the bill that was accepted, which is unfortunate. So the only way that we can get speed enforcement in a fixed camera style in the city is in conjunction with the red light running cameras. So I reached out to my traffic manager and asked him, okay, what is some of the data? What if we wanted to do like a pilot to see how effective it was at a key intersection in Bend? Specifically on the state highway is the one that I'm talking about, although the city always has the opportunity to pursue that on other roads, but that isn't anything that I have any involvement with. So some of the key locations that were identified by the Bend Police Department were Highway 20 and 27. And then the Parkway and Powers Road, specifically because you have pedestrians that cross there often. And it's similar to 27th and Highway 20. And the risk is higher for those vulnerable road users at those locations where there aren't any other, specifically on the Parkway, there aren't any other close east to west connections across the Parkway that involve like either an overpass or an underpass. And there's those more protected roadway paths. And the first thing that was brought to my attention by my traffic manager was the risk that you run of increasing rear end crashes when you install red light cameras, because people know they're there, they're usually signed, they'll slam on their brakes so that they don't run the red light at that intersection because they don't want the ticket. So that is something that has to be put into consideration. But I was reminded probably 3 times that ODOT isn't an enforcement agency. So while it is okay for me to champion this as a possible enforcement option, the only backing that ODOT can really give is saying, here's the guidelines and the rules, see if you want to do it, and then we offer a permit for the city to use like our existing structure on the highway to house the lights, which was a little frustrating for me to hear. I even went to the state level program manager to see if there were any behavioral funds that we could get in grant form through NHTSA, and they said no, we generally don't. Okay, so basically I wanted to follow around with this conversation to see if this group was interested in pursuing this, you know, bringing it to city council, bringing it to city managers, because of the fact that it is in the TSAP in 2 different locations. I think I wrote down that it was A10 and A56, if I'm correct. Maybe you can correct me if I'm not right.
I think you're close.
Yes. So it's really close to those 2. It is definitely a legitimate enforcement option. The other thing that was brought up by the patrol sergeant was that Bend Police Department only has 1 traffic officer, 1 on the whole force. And he's also their reconstructionist. So he goes around to all the crashes and he helps do the investigations for those. He doesn't have a lot of time to go out and actually enforce the traffic laws. So that is a frustration that he's experiencing, that he doesn't feel like his current staffing can really make an impact as far as having live officers out enforcing the traffic rules. And then I think the only other piece of information that you need that I haven't mentioned is the fact that these citations need to be reviewed by someone who has enforcement authority. So it has to be an officer or a sworn official who can actually review the red light camera photos and then issue the citations. While they do generate a form of revenue, it is the rules that it has to go back into the safety programming, which of course no one would want to propose a system where they were making money off of these citations. Not only is that going to get community pushback, but it's a requirement that the money goes back into these safety programs as part of our guidelines. So one of the ways that some of the agencies, the law enforcement agencies, have gotten around the cost of having an officer that's just dedicated to reviewing these enforcement photos is bringing back a retired police officer who still has the ability to issue citations and having them come in and just review it on a part-time basis. Then there's not that whole benefit load or any of those other associated costs with having a full-time employee. So those are some of the things I found out as I was digging around the state, trying to figure out what was going on in other jurisdictions. And not a lot of funding available from ODOT at this time, but it is an option. So I wanted to see what you guys thought.
Yeah. Well, I know we talked a lot about it when we created the safety action plan. So when we did that, Ashley and I worked a lot with enforcement, and there were some hurdles, and this may not be all the right group, because we don't have Ben PD here today, but they are understanding of what we're talking about. And we wanted to just get some information. And I know Janet Ruby had to leave at 11, so she snuck out. So she would be the natural one I would ask, because she runs the Signal program at this point. But from a communication standpoint, knowing that this is being discussed is really helpful for, I think, county and city staff to know that this might be something that may get a little bit more discussion points later, and I want to keep you posted on that information. And then Cody, as the engineer of our meeting, do you have any like background or comments about this program that might help us lay people understand a little bit more about the nuances?
I mean, I guess first, just we're talking about something that strictly be within the city of Bend, so the county's not going to have any authority or jurisdiction or really say in this whatsoever.
Right, unless, you know, it went to Lapine or something and they had a photo enforcement there too, you know, that could be possible as part of state highways.
I mean, you know, I guess first, obviously, when we're talking about the ideal scenario in terms of enforcement, the ideal is always an officer in a car with lights flashing, where not only the person getting cited is learning a lesson, but all of those driving by are also learning lessons. But I mean, outside of that, I mean, as far as photo enforcement, from an engineering perspective, I don't have a lot of insight on that. I think mostly what I've heard has been more detrimental things about them than positive things about them. The issues with you know, the potential for causing rear end collisions that's come up has been a big one. Controversy around the vendors that provide that service and get paid for every you know, whether it's every citation that gets issued or whatever. I know have also been hot topics, but I think in general I've heard more bad about them than good. I know we've a few years ago when some of this legislation was coming up in Oregon, some of our conversations with our sheriff's office was, yeah, we want no part of this. So.
Okay. Well, yeah, it's good to hear, because I think Ben PD would want sheriff support. So having a county sheriff supporting it or not is kind of helpful for talking through it.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly,
yeah.
I'm not speaking for the sheriff's office. I just know a couple
right.
years ago, and there was talk in this legislation of you know, extending casting a wider net here and allowing it for not only for you know, in certain cities, but intersections and even road segments in general and on all public roads in Oregon. I know our conversation with our sheriff's office at that time is that was not something they wanted to really get behind at that point.
Nice. Okay. Joshua?
Oh, yeah, I'd be kind of curious to, so when I was in San Diego, they hadn't, and I don't work for the city government when I was there, so don't know the specifics, but they had rolled out a program like this, and then it went away. And so I don't know the history of that or kind of what happened with that, but I think it'd be helpful to hear from some other communities that have done this, like when have they done it and it works and it sticks, and then when have they done it and it kind of falters and goes away. My understanding at a high level is the San Diego stuff was really driven politically by council and not so much by law enforcement. So that would be, I think, an interesting, any additional insight we could have before kind of going down that road, I think would be helpful.
There is the Portland Police Department report that I sent that I would be happy to share that outlines, you know, what's happening with their program currently for the last 2 years and kind of the benefits or drawbacks to their plan and kind of what some of the metrics are. So I'm happy to share that with the group if you'd like to see it.
Okay, yeah, I have a copy of that too. So you just sent it to me this morning, right?
Yeah.
So I can share that out. I think our next steps with Vanessa is really just to have a meeting with Janet Ruby and Ben PD and go from there. And then we can just report back as to what we find out just via email at this point. And then we'll know more. But since we're talking about transportation safety and Vanessa was coming, she wanted to kind of fill this one in too. So I think for now, that's probably a good stopping point for this subject. And then give you back to Clark and Tammy to kind of wrap us up, I think.
Well, I think we're ready to close things out. I want to thank you all for the participation. I mentioned there's some dates, times, et cetera, that we'll be getting back to shop with you and then asking for your help, of course, in publicizing upcoming survey and summit. In terms of the slide there, one of the things that Ovi, you might want to mention that you've got some links available or will have some links available for information there.
Yeah, so we had that Zoom or Teams meeting with Clackamas County on their program, and I think that's a really good meeting for anyone who wasn't in attendance. Most of the communication folks to share. So that link will be coming up soon, and then also other PMT meetings. So this one I'll have recorded and shared out. It'll be on a YouTube link, so you could share it. We could take an excerpt of it to the neighborhood associations or anything like that as well. There's just some good pieces in there. So I just want to know that will be available soon. And then if it's helpful, I could create, a sub page on our transportation safety program that has these presentations and then also some other information so that we could share it as we start developing community communications. We have a resource to this, but I'm not sure if everybody wants to go down that level, but I will definitely share all the information, PowerPoint presentation, and the link to the past Clackamas County meeting that we had in the next day or two, or Monday.
So with that, thank you all for coming. Now go out and seize the weekend.
Oh yeah, and then do my doodle poll that tells me what day we're gonna have in August. It should be on your email.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thanks everyone. Happy summer.
Thank you.
Thanks. Happy
Thank
Friday.
you.
Have a good weekend.